the more and more that I think about what this coaching staff brings, look, even when Mike Schilt left, I was thrilled that they kept the majority of the coaching staff intact.
Mm-hmm.
And I know it's gone through a little bit of a shake-up this offseason, losing Jeff Albert, losing Mike Maddox. But I'm encouraged. Like yesterday we had Rob Raines on, who did a nice feature on STLSportsPage.com on Dusty Blake, the new pitching coach, who was the pitching strategist. And what I've heard from him, and then he had some beautiful quotes from the Duke head coach where Dusty was prior to joining Major League Baseball. And the guy passed him over like a couple of different times for the pitching coach job at Duke.
Mm-hmm.
And then finally he hired him, and he goes, I wasn't going to make the mistake a third time around.
Oh.
And he goes, I know that Dusty's going to be a big league pitching coach here in the next 5 years. And to the day, to the 5-year prediction, Dusty Blake is the Cardinals pitching coach. So I'm excited about that, and I think getting Matt Holliday into the fold, there's just a unique bond that this staff has, and it's all led, of course, by Ollie Marmol, who I was thoroughly impressed with in year one.
So I think it's a retooling, right? I mean, you have more coaches than ever. I mean, a Major League Baseball staff now, if you roll out everybody who's got something to do with it or has a uniform even, it looks like Congress now. You've got so many people that are going through it. But, you're doing a retooling now. I mean, I think that for me it was interesting to see that this was the year that Jeff Albert moved on, whereas it seemed like this was the year where you heard his name the least of all out of the last 2 or 3. Mike Maddox, hey, I mean, people come and go. I think that when you look at a lot of staffs, and if you're especially over the last couple of decades here, you got used to the same folks being around.
Mm-hmm.
But, the Cardinals have become, or remained at least, the biggest pipeline for coaches in the league, especially when you look at the manager turnover out of that bench coach role.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's almost like a guaranteed ticket the way that things have gone of late. So it's interesting to see. I mean, you've got David Bell that came out, he was on the hitting side. You've got Skip Schumacher, who, was just in the role. And now, both of those are two guys that are leading rebuilding clubs. It'll be interesting to see what Matt Holliday's, I guess next steps look like from this point.
It is kind of cool how after Tony La Russa retired in 2011, the Cardinals have gone in interesting directions with their manager. And even Matheny, I mean, yeah, he took over a team that won the World Series, but it was without Albert Pujols, of course, in 2012. They go to the NLCS. Mike Schilt takes the reins, and in his first full season as the Cardinals manager, he takes the ball club to the NLCS.
Mm-hmm.
And Ollie Marmol, in his first season as head coach after being the bench coach under Schilte, takes the team into the playoffs. And I know it was kind of a disappointing exit against the Philadelphia Phillies, but they won the division, and they were right back in it. It's pretty unique to have changed managers now 3 times over the last, decade.
Mm-hmm.
And in each of the first year under the new manager, they've guided them to a National League Central title, which is hard to do.
So what's year 2 been? Maybe that's what we need to be looking at, learning about where the past has been to help to predict the future.
Yeah.
What's the second year played out like?
That's a good question.
Well, it was
13, you went to the World Series.
with Mike Matheny, and then in 13, and then with Schilt.
20 was kind of weird though, because that was the COVID season.
Yeah, it was a little bit of a scratch off, figure this out type of year. What would happen with that? So again, talking about the past all the time doesn't necessarily mean it's completely different people, completely different places. But yeah, it's a good precedent set up. And we were talking before the show started. We spend a lot of time talking about what's not. And I think that we all get to be a little bit guilty of that, especially in the line of work that we're in, where what's not, what needs to happen, who should be doing this. Let's look at the analysis, look at it this way. But there was an article on MLB.com this week that had the Cardinals ranked as having the 5th best lineup in all of baseball. So for me, like I just said, immediately part of my head went to, man, is this an indictment of the rest of baseball, or am I not paying attention to the sun shining on the city the way that it should?
Dave Solomon, who's back at the 590 studios helping us out producing today, he chimes in. He just texted me. He goes, don't forget about Tony La Russa back in 96. So really it's the last 4 managers if you go. Like that just doesn't happen all the time.
And 96 is one of the more improbable years that I can remember in my lifetime at least. I mean, they put a lot of investments into building the team up, but, I mean, they were 1 win away from beating the Braves at peak power and going to the World Series, and that one that launched the Yankee dynasty. Like, that was not the expectation in the fall of 95. I'm going to tell you that much right now.
95 was probably pretty –
early 90s were an underrated, worst spell in franchise
Cardinals
history almost, if not the worst one of.
Well, if you go back and look at their success or their lack of success, a lot of times their lack of success has gone on for like a decade. But that was only half a decade, because as soon as Tony took over, I mean, they immediately started this winning that they've pretty much been on ever since the DeWitts took ownership.
Well, I mean, and it's a relative lack of success, too. You know, the thing I say is that, you know, I mean, the Cardinals are one of the teams that have had the least high draft picks in the history of the draft era, because they're never up there. I think the highest they ever got was 4. Braden Looper back in 93 or 92 or something like that. So, yeah, I mean, the Cardinals just don't have long down spells. So when you have a run like 2016 through 2018 where you don't make the playoffs for 3 years, it feels like forever. Or 88 through 95 where you didn't have that success. Like, those years were rough. I mean, they were barely even finishing in the top half of a much larger NL NL West, NL East back then, before the divisional era. But over the tenure of all these managers we're talking about, they've been solid, if not spectacular. And I think that that's the problem. When you're solid long enough, spectacular is the only way up. But we disregard the other half of it that is awful, and they're never awful. They're never awful. They're awful by standards, some standards sometimes. But it's harder. The next step is spectacular, and I think you saw that in that running of those lineups, where there are some spectacular lineups in baseball right now. But the Cardinals, if all things click, not that far away. They're winning divisions for a reason.
Yeah, the sky felt like it was falling. I remember back in 2008 when I was the booth assistant with Mr. Shannon and Mr. Rooney, and they went like 70 – they had a bad year in 2008. They missed the playoffs. And you felt like it felt like the sky was falling. And then what did they do immediately the next season? Boom, they go trade for Matt Holliday at the deadline, and that kind of recreates the magic in an offense with a player who was here for a long time. And then you could probably have similar arguments in the later years of the Matheny era, where it got a little stale and you just didn't have superstars. It took forever to try to replace Pujols at first base. And then they get the Goldschmidt deal. And then, of course, they go out and trade for Nolan Arenado. So even when they do have seasons that are quote-unquote down, you never feel like you're in a situation where the Pirates are at right now.
Goodness God, no. Could you imagine? Could you imagine if the Cardinals were as bad as the Rams were for the time that they were?
God.
Could you imagine what that – it would be such a shock. I don't think people would even understand what that would be like to go through for 6 months a year, to see that much bad baseball.
Now, I could make the case that I think the Rams were doing that on purpose.
Sure, but the outcome was the outcome.
Yeah.
Just like we say that the Cardinals, you know, one of the critiques of the Cardinals is that they decide to compete instead of, quote-unquote, go all in on purpose. Their intention is to compete every year and to be competitive, which can drive some people crazy, but there's a lot of teams who what streak did the Mariners break this year? Was it 20 years?
Yeah, it may have been 99, I think, or maybe the year 2000 was the last time. I think it was 20.
It was 01. It was
is that the year they won 100?
Yeah, it was the 116 win year. So it was 01. So it was 20 seasons or 21 years. I get a little mixed up on that 01 to 02 mix.
That's a long drought,
that's a
man.
Long time. I mean, I was in high school back then, and I ain't been in that for a while. So the lineups, we mentioned the lineups that were ranked in front of the Cardinals. The Mets were number 1. Especially with the addition.
Did they do something
Carlos
this week?
Correa. Yeah, I think so.
What'd they do?
They went over $500 million in payroll, I think, or commitments in total by adding Carlos Correa in a thief in the night move. I get up pretty early. I get up every day. I'm up before around 5:30 at least. And I'm just, I check my phone, see what's going on, and usually not anything all that interesting. Oh, Carlos Correa signed a what with who? Because when I went to sleep, they were deciding if they were going to have a press conference for him to sign with the Giants, but now he's a Met? Oh, all right, cool.
And time had passed, too. I mean, that deal had been reported, for a handful of days?
Yeah, it had been 2 weeks almost.
You almost figured, how had there not even been a press conference already to introduce him? But the physical, they had a disagreement. I don't know what
I can't wait
truly
to hear
learn about that. Do you think we will?
We'll find out something.
The Giants have been tight-lipped because they're not going to announce anything in terms of a player's medical history.
Somebody's going to say something eventually. This is too big of a deal, too big of a news piece just to say, oh, well, it didn't work out. He hasn't passed the Mets physical yet.
I guess
but I cannot – but I think the Mets are jammed up, though, now because Steve Cohen already commented on the signing and it being completed. I mean, Scott Boras is set now because if they don't finish the deal now, you could have some issues with that.
12-year deal, $315 million. It did strike me as an intriguing move only because, as many have pointed out, you've got Francisco Lindor at short, and so that will shift Correa to go play third base, which, look, there have been plenty of shortstops over a timeless history that have made the move from short to third, and it's been seamless and everything.
Jeter, A-Rod, anybody?
But does Correa seem like a guy? I mean, he seems still, he's 28 years old, and sometimes ego plays into these things, and it just didn't seem like he would jump the ship.
From all things that I've heard about it is that is the least of worries with Correa, and the key to it being is the relationship that he has with Francisco Lindor, who is a great friend of his and a guy he's really close with, and I think he relishes the opportunity to get to play with. Look, Alex Rodriguez was 28 years old when he signed with the Yankees and moved off a shortstop. He was the best shortstop in baseball. Then he just became the best third baseman in baseball because that bat travels, and I think that's going to be the same case for Correa. Now, Correa won't be the best third baseman in baseball, but, I mean, we've seen a pedigree for this. You saw Manny Machado move earlier in his career, and I think if all things accounted for, is a much, much better impact defensively, especially at third base than at shortstop. I mean, that is a fantastic, fantastic addition they've got there, and Correa's already done this, having played third base in the last World Baseball Classic. So, you're going to have to step up and do it more often, but you know what this is about. It ain't about where the glove goes. It's about where the bat's at.
Where the bat's at.
Yeah.
By the way, on Steve Cohen, this guy, okay, he spent a boatload of money this offseason. He is projected to spend more than $100 million in luxury tax. That will be more than roughly 10 teams will spend on their entire payroll in 2023.
Yeah.
Which is hard to fathom.
Well,
and I know we've been very vocal about the necessity for a salary cap floor. But even if you're the Cardinals, who are just outside the top 15, like if you're John Mozeliak today and you're looking at your lineup and you definitely feel pretty good about it, it does have to sort of bug you that there is a team like the Mets who are willing to go out there and spend $800 million in an offseason. I mean, that's just got to be unsettling a bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, but also, what is it? The bed that you make, you're going to sleep in. And there's an opportunity for a lot of these things to get addressed as recently as last spring. And you came away with the new collective bargaining agreement that you did, and you've got the tiers and you've got the flexibility that's in there. And I understand why the MLBPA doesn't want to put a roof on, because when you put a roof on, you cap the ability for people to earn. So some of these deals don't happen if there's a roof in there, and then it doesn't entice owners. Because here's the thing. We look at it from the aspect of competitive balance to an extent when you talk about that. When you talk about how many teams are going to be making more money payroll-wise, the league average as of right now is $112 million. And that's going to be breaking it straight down the middle between all 30 teams.
Wow. Where does that start? I'm just curious on the list. Like, how many teams are under 112?
So the teams that are under 112 are 15. It's split directly. I'm sorry, that's under
112.
Yeah, that's under 112. It's 15 under 112.
So, wait, the jump from the 112 is the next highest, the Cardinals?
The Boston Red Sox are at $104 million. They're in 16th place, and the Cardinals are in 15th at 114.
Huh.
And that's with the Red Sox with some money coming off the books right now. And the Red Sox probably will spend a little bit more to get in the shape there. But the key thing is that you get to a funny number part right here where you can put together handfuls of teams that aren't even paying as much as the Mets are going to pay in luxury tax. When you look at the complete team of the A's, the Rays, and the Orioles, They aren't even making they're not even making that as a trio. They bring their whole payrolls together.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah, and if you bring it up another level from there, I believe you're going to get to the same thing. So even the 25th through 27th, which are going to be the Pirates, the Royals, and the Guardians, aren't spending that much on their team in full. If they are, just barely over it.
That's got to be if you're a Royal. I mean, look at any of those teams. If you're a fan of any of those organizations, it's got to just sit there and bug you.
Well, let me ask you the big question, though. Yeah, I mean, I think you're a little conditioned to it if you're a fan of some of those teams.
It's true.
You can deal with it.
It goes on for 20 years.
With all this money that's spent, do you look at the Mets as being the favorite to win?
Well, I mean, I look at the lineup, okay, and I get we're discussing this article. You can read it at MLB.com from Anthony Castrovins, but he ranks the top 10 lineups in baseball for 2023. And, you know, I sometimes despise lists because it seems like an off-season story that you put in there and they're inevitable and you discuss them. But what do they really mean? I mean, you could get to spring training and any one of these players could go down with an injury and everything changes. And, oh, by the way, they're not even putting out pitching staffs or anything of that like, which the Mets had a pretty robust pitching staff last season to complement their offense. But
and still do.
They're number one, right? On this list, Brandon Nimmo, Carlos Correa, Francisco Lindor, Pete Alonso, Jeff McNeil, Starlin Marte, Daniel Vogelbach, Mark Canha, and Omar Narvaez. Which, all right, and it's a solid lineup.
And you've got the number one prospect in baseball in Francisco Alvarez behind the plate that I'm sure they're going to look to get in the mix at some point too.
Do you look at that lineup, though, and go, boy, I wouldn't want to take them on in a best of seven?
Well, first of all, I don't know if I think that lineup itself is the best lineup in baseball.
I don't either. I think right underneath it at number 2, the San Diego Padres are sitting pretty. Now there's an asterisk attached to it because Fernando Tatis won't be able to join the club until he serves his the rest of his suspension. But I mean, when they do get him back, Tatis Jr., Juan Soto, Manny Machado, and Xander Bogaerts. I mean, that 4 right there is better than any 4 I think you could look at on the Mets side of things.
It's a pretty enticing conversation to talk about Nimmo and Jeff McNeil, who are 2 guys I think that are somewhat underrated in what they do. Big contact guys that are going to get on base and drive people around. But, yeah, I mean, I think that without a doubt for me, I think that Padres lineup is more dangerous than that one. I mean, I would be just as interested in what the Astros lineup can be at 3, with Jose Altuve, Jeremy Pena, Yordan Alvarez, Alex Bregman, Kyle Tucker, Jose Abreu, Michael Brantley.
Yeah, they still look pretty good, don't they?
Good luck.
Yeah.
I mean, but then you get to the Blue Jays after that, who are just a softball team. I mean, they just crush the ball all the time. You get to the Cardinals, but bringing it back home, I'm going to be honest. I again, like I said, disclaimer. I'm always going to look to see where the opportunity is at here. That's part of what I'm paid to do.
Mm-hmm.
It's part of what I try to see what I can do. But when I look,
they pay you for this?
When I look at, you know what? On occasion, yeah, it happens.
Damn, I gotta call somebody.
Yeah, no, I tell you what. Out of some gigs I've had, the check comes. The check comes for this one. But when I look at the Braves and the Dodgers and the Phillies, I don't know if I look at the Cardinals lineup and I say, absolutely, I'm passing on those other lineups for the one here. No knock. I mean, having a top 10 lineup, I mean, is strong. But I definitely like the Cardinals lineup more than the Yankees lineup, who comes in at number 9. But I think it gets really interesting when you look at the Phillies, who have put Trey Turner in the mix there, and what that team can be. I think the Dodgers remain strong with what they've got, especially with Mookie Betts and Freddie Freeman and Will Smith. I mean,
where's he got the Phillies? Oh, he's got the Phillies 8.
Phillies are
right
8.
behind the Dodgers and the Braves.
And I really like the Braves lineup too.
I do too.
I tell you what, there's a guy at the top of that lineup by the name of Ronald Acuna,
yep,
who's got all his best days still ahead of him to come. And one of these years, it's going to happen, and the MVP race is going to be a formality.
I genuinely hope that he stays healthy.
Yeah,
because
me too. Enjoy watching him play.
He's a type of guy that when a kid goes and watches a Ronald Acuna Jr. play, that will make you a fan of the game. He's one of those guys, and they are littered across Major League Baseball. But if he shows up to a ballpark, he has the ability to move the needle, and I mean on a visiting standpoint.
Yeah.
Like if the Braves come to St. Louis, to play the Cardinals, going and having the opportunity to see Ronald Acuna Jr. is worth the price of admission.
When I went to go see the Braves this year, the time I made it down for that series, he wasn't playing. I was let down. He's a guy I want to see. When I go, that's a guy I want to see out there. But what the Braves have is a lineup in a lot of ways that kind of reminds me of parts of the Cardinals lineup where they've got the names you know. They've got Acuna in the mix. They've got Ozzie Albies. They've got the guys that you know. Austin Riley's a name that you should know a lot more about if you don't. But, a lot of underrated guys like Matt Olson. I think Sean Murphy emerged some this year, and people are going to know a lot more about him. Vaughn Grissom, who, was a big reason why they said, we don't need to pay that money for Dansby. We got a great option here. Michael Harris, who's, going to be, 22 this year? I mean, there's a lot of upside there.
And don't forget, Marcelo Ozuna can still hit, smash a baseball.
He can still hit. He shouldn't be hitting eighth, but, that says a little bit about him and where he's at with his career right now. But, yeah, that's a dangerous guy, too. There's parts of that lineup, though. So when I name a guy like a Michael Harris, when I name a guy like even an Austin Riley who's turned the corner and become who he was supposed to come, or a Vaughn Grissom, those are the guys that when I look at the Cardinals lineup that I say, boy, if Dylan Carlson can become Michael Harris, or boy, if Tyler O'Neill can give me the day in, day out and really make that turn and become an impact like an Ozzie Albies, or what a guy like that can do when he's healthy. Then I look at this Cardinal lineup and I say, yeah, bring it on. Mm-hmm. The Mets don't worry me. The Dodgers don't worry me. Bring it on. Now, we're not talking pitching staffs because there are some pitching staffs hitched to a couple of these teams that make a big difference. But let's just say the if pays out and you get what you want to get from an O'Neill, a Carlson, hell, even a Yepez, and you can get a Jordan Walker who's teased in the article as well as being a part of it. Yeah, bring on anybody with that lineup.
You just got to have something out of O'Neill and Carlson. I mean, those are the question marks in the Cardinals lineup. I mean, Carlson was such a disappointment last season, and that's an understatement. And Tyler O'Neill was on the injured list for almost the entire year and just could never quite get going. But if you get relatively average seasons out of both of those players, think about how that boost your offense like that. Those are two keys. Now, I do find it kind of intriguing as well that there's a name omitted from this lineup that he's put out. I mean, right now he's got Edman, Contreras, Goldschmidt, Arenado.
I don't love the order of the lineup, but I see what we're doing here.
Donovan, O'Neill, Nootbaar, Yepez as the DH, and Carlson as the center fielder.
You're thinking about maybe a left-handed guy?
I am thinking about a left-handed batter.
Yeah.
That is not in that lineup.
Oh, Nolan Gorman isn't showing up. Yeah, so I mean, again, but that's the key to having a great lineup, though. What all these teams have, when you look across the board at all of them, versatility. It's not about your front nine because you got to have more than just that. I think when you look at the Yankees and you looked at when they came to town and the Cardinals had that series that they had against them, it was because, if it wasn't Aaron Judge, it wasn't happening. Matt Carpenter was running hot. He was making some things happen. I think he could be an interesting ad for the Padres.
I do too.
Signing with them, earlier this week. And but it's got to be more than just those guys. You got to have 12 to 14 guys that can contribute on your roster, and I think that is a strength for the Cardinals that shouldn't be undersold.
He didn't even mention in this article. He didn't even mention Nolan Gorman's name, which is that's crazy to me. A year ago, if you were to have projected the Cardinals lineup, if you were guessing what the lineup would look like for 2023, there is no shot. I mean, Gorman would be in this lineup over certainly Brendan Donovan, I would say, and definitely Yepez and definitely Nootbaar. I mean, those are three guys that in this writer's mind have already leapfrogged a talent like Nolan Gorman.
Now I will say this, though, too. When you're writing captions, it's the worst because you always want to say at least another three things that you can't work in.
Yeah.
And I'm sure Gorman was the one that was just on the chopping block floor right there. But, when I look at this team and I look at the guys that are mentioned here, mainly Donovan and mainly Nootbaar and even Yepez to an extent, those are guys that I say, hey, if you can even take half the stride you took last year, that's an incredibly, incredibly deeper lineup, especially if you can get back. But as I've said, and as I will say until we get into the season, and it's not an issue anymore, it's the yeah buts and the ifs about this lineup that give me a little bit of pause about saying you're ready right now to do more than just roll the NL Central.
Gorman is still he's 22 years old. He'll turn 23 next May.
He's a kid.
And I don't know if you heard any of the interview that John Mozeliak had with Frank Cusimano on News Channel 5 this week. But it was really enlightening. And sometimes it's always refreshing to hear from Mo. I really do find it refreshing because he takes you from maybe sitting on the edge where you want to sit there and go, what is this team doing? You're reminded of his patience and his he knows what's going on. Mm-hmm. He knows there's question marks with this team. And he reminded everybody, look, we're still in December. The team that we have right now on the roster, it might be different come spring training, and it can always look different as the season moves along, and we might do something at the deadline. But what's tricky about that is when you see teams that are spending the kind of money and they're getting the shiny objects. I related it earlier this week to like Christmas morning, and your brother and sister are getting all the cool stuff, and you're stuck with like an ugly Christmas sweater. And you're going, what is all this? But then you're reminded, oh, wait, I've already got some very nice assets that need to take the next step, and a lot of the players we're mentioning are in that conversation.
Look at it this way. You had a big birthday. You had a big birthday. You got your stuff already. And also remember this. You're the older child, too. You're the one with the 11 trophies sitting up there. You're the one that have been competing and have been going after it. The Mets haven't won anything since '86. The Padres have never won anything. It is what it is. I mean, that's the past and we're in the present. But the urgency to get over the hump and to be able to make things happen is always going to compel you to do to really go for it. And here's the thing. Here's the big thing I'll say is that, hey, you can set the bricks and you can plant the seeds. You can build a foundation. You can try to grow a tree in December. But titles aren't won in December. And there's plenty of people who have won the winter, and that's their big win for the year. And there's not a single pennant that says we had the best offseason of all time this year. So, hey, what is it going to turn into and what's it really going to mean? Steve Cohen can spend all the money on earth. But, man, if that was the case, the Yankees would have 85 world titles instead of the 27, 28 they've got.
Matty, there are a lot of teams that win the offseason, and when they get into the real season and the players that they paid are not productive, then, the knives start coming out the other way. What are you doing spending all this money? They can't evaluate any talent. They don't know how to identify free agents, this, that, and the other. And when you throw money around like certain teams have, it's going to – again, it's just going to be intriguing to see how it goes because Steve Cohen doesn't appear to be fazed whatsoever by the money.
He doesn't care at all.
So if he signs a guy and he's terrible and a couple of years from now he decides to just cut bait, I mean – That's pretty cutthroat.
Yeah, and these are
that's George Steinbrenner.
And the interesting thing to me about it is that just 2 or 3 years ago we just went through it with Nolan. With Nolan Arenado here, is that all the rage for contracts was to have opt-outs, was to have guys that had 1 or 2 escape clauses in the contract. You haven't seen that this offseason. These are contracts that are ironclad. They're in. Aaron Judge's contract, he's in. Trey Turner is in. Correa, they're in. Like, it's a very interesting change away from that, and I think it's because these owners are spending huge cash again, and guys are like, why would I walk away from this? I'm in a good place. I put it on you to not have to pay me anymore.
Correa's going to be 40 by the time the contract is over.
Yeah. Still
making, I can't do math like that fast, but still making a pretty buck.
And we don't know how that contract is structured either. I mean, there could be a lot of floating money in that thing. It could be moving around a bit. I'm really interested to see what happens with that. But, yeah, I mean, I've never been a big proponent of saying sign a guy well deep from his late 20s into his late 30s. It just doesn't pay out. Mm-hmm. And it's unless you're saying that you're going to that the value of the contract is all of the upfront impact, and once you get that, you're good to go, and you don't care about what happens on the back end. Teams like the Mets and the Yankees and, to a certain extent, the Giants and Red Sox, they can do things like that, but the Cardinals can't. So you see deals that are built the way they are for the Cardinals. And I just think that one of the good things about baseball is that, to an extent, there's a very bad thing where people aren't enticed to spend enough money. And that's why you have teams that are, $20 million a year and some teams that are $280 million a year. Those two teams shouldn't be in the same league together, as far as I'm concerned. That's two completely different worlds. But the middle had a lot of diversity in it and a lot of opportunity, a lot of teams trying to win a lot of different ways. I'd be curious to know what you think about it. Do you think that what Steve Cohen is doing is bad for baseball?
I don't think it's bad for baseball. I I think if you look at the notoriety that it's getting, first of all, it's dominating the news.
Yeah.
So he's making Major League Baseball stay in the news cycle, which is a seismic shift from a year ago. Think back a year ago at this time. There was nothing happening. You know why? Because Major League Baseball was on the verge of shutting the doors for a lockout that would eat a couple of weeks of the season. And the difference now, back then, it appeared that the players wanted money in their early seasons, right? They wanted to get paid for what they were about to do. And already, we're seeing players, Justin Verlander is how old? And he's getting 100 and however,
86. He's getting 40 plus per year.
2 years.
Yeah.
So owners are starting to open the wallet for these veterans who couldn't buy a free agent contract over the last 5 years.
Well, and it's nice to see people getting paid for that. But what I will say is that what all of this is booting me up for, that's the most interesting thing to me, and I'm just going to sit here and I hope everything works out to help it happen. The Shohei Ohtani race next winter is going to be nuts.
He could be a $500 million player.
I think that you're going to see it. I think it's going to happen. And I'm very, very, very interested to see who is the one that goes and does it.
Who is his agent? Is it Boris? I'm not sure.
I don't know. I don't know his agent.
Whoever his agent is, though, you would think will be playing up the fact that, you'll be paying for my client services not only as a hitter, but he's a pitcher as well.
And what is the deal? Like, it's a groundbreaking deal. Like, it's incredible. He's a CAA guy. So it's for his agency as far as represents him. It's going to be a groundbreaking deal because you are paying for two pitchers. Two players. That's why I hope that he stays healthy this year. I hope he continues to do everything he is. Hell, I even hope he actually gets on the trade market this summer at some point because even that's going to be nuts. What do you trade for him? Like, what kind of package does that have to be?
I have no idea. I got a text here. Were the Giants smart to cut Correa for not passing the physical? I think time will tell.
Yeah, we don't know enough about what happened, because it also sounds like Boris said,
what a cop-out answer, right?
By now it's got to happen. You could say, all right, we'll sign you anyway, but I think it goes to the point. For me, no, I wouldn't. If I had any hesitancy about a 12-year, $300 million deal, I'm out.
Yeah.
I'm out. I'm not doing it. Because then,
and what are they saying? Back? It was a back issue?
I haven't heard anything. The main thing I heard was they said he had a lower body injury from when he was in the minor leagues.
What is this, hockey?
It was 2014 or something like that. And they said, but he's had no history of such an injury in the majors, and that in 2014 he was 19 or 18 years old. He was like 17 when he got drafted. Something crazy like that. I don't know.
Insane.
I want the details for this thing to come out, though. Obviously,
somebody will leak it.
HIPAA rules and things it is. But, if I can get the details that I got about the Trevor Bauer incident, I want to get the details that I could get about this thing.
The intern that picked up the physical off the printer and delivered it to the top dogs with the Giants will be the leaker. We'll get the leaker at some point.
It's going to get out there. With all the details around all the things that we do hear about, we're going to hear something about this.